Welcome to Terror in Tandem, a podcast about finding entertainment in the macabre, hosted by the knowledgeable and lovable Laura and Richard Mathiasen. Each episode we discuss the horror genre, from books to film to TV and beyond. Sometimes even from the beyond. You can find us on YouTube and on Instagram at Terror in Tandem, and you'll always find our latest episode on our website, terrorintandem.com.
Hi.
Hello.
You have quite a basic timbre to your voice.
Thank you.
Bass.
Oh, you said basic.
I know.
Which I...
Basic.
Oh, yes, of course.
It's very... Well, now you're just breathing heavy into the mic.
I feel like I have such a squeaky voice.
You do, but in that intro,
it was
a little deeper than usual.
Well, I'm happy to say that after 43 years, my testicles have descended.
Into madness.
Yes.
Just like your brain.
Actually, they keep descending. It's a real problem. Got yards of... Anyway.
We are going to be talking about the sewers.
Where all our poop goes.
Yeah, gray water.
Yes, gray water. What a wonderful introduction to another fan favorite installment of our hit recurring series, Remake.
We haven't done one in a while because we really wanted to do a big one.
We did. Like no kidding.
This is like remake, and second version, and long make, and it's been remade.
Remake, watch 9 hours of content for this episode. Stephen King's
and It Chapter 1 and 2.
Yes.
That's sort of how they're tagged.
Stephen King's It from 1990, the two-part made-for-TV miniseries directed by Tommy Lee Wallace, aired on ABC.
Yeah.
And, of course, 2017 and 2019's It's Chapter 1 and 2 by director Andy Muschietti.
Which was a theatrical
release. Twas.
So let's sort of talk a little bit about the overarching story and dive into the miniseries and the chapters.
As we all know, this is based on the novel Push by Sapphire.
Stephen King's It, which is about almost 1,200 pages long. So as...
I forgot.
It's like 1,000...
No, I'm
186 pages.
I remember getting those in mass market paperback, which I feel like that doesn't really exist anymore. Paperbacks are so expensive. But you get the cheap $3.99 mass market, but it was so thick.
Yeah.
Because the pages weren't very vertically tall. Yeah, you had to crack the spine to fucking read it. And then when I would get scared and throw it, it really dented the wall.
It does.
Yeah.
And we cracked our spines diving deep into this one for
We sure did, doing all sorts of weird clown dances. So
Stephen King's It, as it's been labeled, the miniseries, as Richard mentioned, came out in 1990 and on ABC. It's set in 1960. A group of teenagers, preteens, work together to fight a demon who presents as a child-killing clown known as Pennywise.
Yes.
And Pennywise is a predatory monster that can transform itself into its prey's worst fears and devour them, allowing to exploit the fears and phobias of all the victims. And it mostly takes on the humanoid form of Pennywise, the demonic dancing clown. So 30 years later, after they defeat the clown in their youth, they have to return to their hometown of Derry to defeat him for good.
Listen, you know the story, folks. It's the reason why you've your entire life been afraid of clowns.
Yeah, well, this is a traumatizing event for any of us that grew up in the 80s and 90s.
Jeez, no
this
kidding.
was maybe something you watched with your parents. I actually watched this miniseries with my parents.
You did?
Yeah. We all loved it very much. I had read the book, so I
did not watch this.
1990, I was,
I didn't
the same age as these kids.
Watch this when it came out. I watched it a few years later. I was not allowed to watch things like this, so I snuck it from. That's right, my local library. And another shout out to the wonderful libraries and librarians out there for allowing the children of repressive parents to become freaks and weirdos in secret. Thank you, librarians.
So this original iteration stars Richard Thomas, Harry Anderson, Annette O'Toole, John Ritter, Seth Green, and Tim Curry as Pennywise.
And Jonathan Brandis, 90s heartthrob.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
Jonathan Brandis. I don't think that's his name.
It is.
Oh. Did he commit suicide?
He did. A very sad. He was in his final film, the Bruce Willis movie Heart's War. And his part was cut down quite a bit, and he had been really hoping that this was going to break him out of his sort of like teen image. It was going to be a serious role, and I guess that really got to him, and he took his own life. Yeah, very sad. Actually, a lot of the actors there are a few. John Ritter and Harry Anderson are both. Yeah,
they passed away.
Have passed on.
Harry Anderson passed away right before Bill Hader found out that he got the role of Richie.
Oh, wow.
And John Ritter, I think, had an aneurysm.
He died. It was very sad. Yeah, it was very sudden. It was a while ago.
And all 7 actors portraying the adult versions of the Losers Club in this film, in this miniseries, have either been nominated for or won either an Emmy or a Golden Globe. So that's what the type of cast and the caliber of cast we're talking about here.
Oh, for sure. This is like, especially for those of you of a certain age, this is a fucking who's who of like TV stars of the era. You've got everything from Night Court to Three's Company, and a very breathy Smallville Annette O'Toole.
Yeah.
Also, Olivia Hussey's in this motherfucker.
She is.
That is no slouch.
All the cast have fond memories of working on this miniseries. They say it was one of the best experiences of their lives on the DVD commentary. Specifically, the kids said it was like one of the best summers of their lives.
That's cool.
And we
especially
hear that,
in this era, with all of the stories coming out now, nice to hear.
We hear that in It Chapter 1 with all of those kid actors or teen actors. They also really loved filming. It
does seem, good on director Tommy Lee Wallace and Andy Muschietti for creating a safe, positive environment for their child actors. I wanted to mention, since you brought up the child actors, so Tim Curry as Pennywise was so scary that the adult actors admitted years later that they avoided him on set.
Avoided him. Mm-hmm.
That they were like legit afraid of him. However, during certain scenes when they had a lot of like child extras, so there's like dozens of kids waiting around. Filmmaking is a slow process. In between setups, it could take quite a lot of time to get the next shot set up. So Tim Curry would come out dressed as a clown, not as Pennywise, as just like a regular non-homicidal clown, and keep the kids entertained so that they didn't,
The crew, they thought they had hired a clown to entertain them between takes.
So,
they didn't know that it was Tim Curry.
How amazing of an actor is that in the same outfit, he can be the scariest clown you've ever seen and also entertaining everyone.
So this was a 2-part miniseries, as you mentioned, directed by Tommy Lee Wallace, and the screenplay was adapted by Lawrence D. Cohen, who also adapted Carrie.
There are a lot of connections going on here. Now, Tommy Lee Wallace we've mentioned before because he directed a personal favorite of mine, Halloween 3: Season of the Witch. He also did Amityville 2, which is, I think, the only Amityville movie I've ever kind of liked. And there's a weird connection here where Tommy Lee Wallace also directed, now I know you remember this movie, The Boy Who Could Fly.
Oh, yeah. I love that movie.
Well, I think everybody of a certain age has fond memories of this very weird, made-for-TV movie.
It's like Boy in the Plastic Bubble,
Exactly.
That was a very weird movie.
I absolutely put those two movies in the same. Yeah. They're like the same kind of Disney after-school type weird 80s movie. So anyway, The Boy Who Could Fly, directed by Tommy Lee Wallace, that was co-starring Fred Gwynne, who played Judd Crandall in the original Pet Sematary. So there's like Stephen King universe connections all over the place here.
Well, ABC introduced this as a miniseries. It was supposed to be 10 hours, directed by George Romero.
I would have liked to have seen that.
Romero did a lot of work, pre-production, and collaborated with Lawrence Cohen to develop the script, but he had to leave because of a scheduling conflict to make Night of the Living Dead. And Tom
Savini directed the 1990 version of that.
Who also did the makeup
of Dawn of the Dead.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Famously unable to do Night of the Living Dead because he was drafted into the Vietnam War.
Right.
Yeah.
The producers were worried that Romero was going to make this too graphic for television.
Oh, certainly would have.
And they lost their nerves. They lost their nerve, essentially.
You cowards.
So they decided to do this 3-part. I think it ended up being condensed into like a 2-part miniseries. 3-part, and then it moved to a 2-part.
Huh. Well, it does, if you want to get into it, you want to just jump right into to our analysis of the 1990 version?
I want to just tell you a little bit about Tim Curry, a little bit more anyway. You said they avoided him on set, but Alice Cooper and Roddy McDowall were other actors considered for the role of Pennywise.
Both veterans of John Carpenter movies.
Yes. Tim Curry has less than 20 minutes of screen time.
Damn. That's like Hannibal Lecter.
Yes. And Tim Curry, in his real life, suffers a debilitating case of chlorophobia.
Holy crap, really?
Which we've talked about, the fear of clowns.
Yikes. And I didn't know that.
Yeah. His contract explicitly stated that while he was on set, there was to be no reflective surfaces within sight of him while he was in makeup.
Damn.
And one makeup tech was almost fired for having a makeup mirror in his hand while he was fixing up Tim Curry's makeup.
Pennywise is a little diva. Yeah, you know what? Tim Curry can do whatever he wants because he is a genius and he's fantastic. Although this was extremely apparent to me in the recent rewatching that we just did. His accent stands out. So, this takes place in Maine and he's a, millions of years old alien.
But he's traveled... Well, they didn't get into that.
No, but so essentially in this version, he's like a clown from the 19th century, but he speaks with this like tough guy Queens accent. He's like, "Hey, Georgie."
I think it's more like an homage to vaudevillian.
Yeah, like the old performer.
Yeah.
For sure. It was, I guess I haven't seen it in so long. I forgot that, when he's talking, he's like, "Hey, I'm Pennywise the clown. How you doing?" And I wonder, it's because, look, he's a wonderful actor, but let's be real. British actors have like 3 American accents. It's, New York City tough guy, Mall of America, or shit kicker.
Yeah.
That's it. And like American actors have basically just posh, Cockney, and Northern when we're doing British. So it's, fair's fair.
Just like in Legend of Billie Jean.
Just like that.
Yeah, so let's jump in.
Awesome. I goddamn love this version.
We're talking about our opinions on it?
Of course, everything is my opinion of things.
Yes.
I love this version. I love it. I remember loving it when I watched it as a kid. I haven't seen it since I was maybe 17 years old. It is so good. It really holds up. It is dated, as you might expect. A made-for-TV movie from 1990 would be. But, damn. I was really impressed with how well this movie holds up.
Well, I agree because I feel like the, censoring of the graphic violence forced this film to be more of a psychological horror and examine the relationships between the adults in facing their childhood traumas together.
Yes.
Which was lacking in the later iterations for me.
Well, something the original version does very, very well is from the beginning, it concurrently tells the story from the childhood perspective and the adult perspective at the same, together. So the story of their 1960 fight against Pennywise unfolds at the same time as their 1990 version.
Yeah.
So we get...
And they're reflecting on it, and the memories are getting kicked up, as is a trauma response or trauma work where you're being,
As a result, I think, of that decision, two things really became apparent to me. Is from start to finish, it's very well paced. There's really not a lull.
Let's just remind the audience how it's laid out. So this miniseries is laid out where, as Richard mentioned, the adults are confronted by its return, and they all have to go back to their hometown of Derry. And the further away they've gotten, their memories have also gone away of their childhood experiences with Pennywise. So
yeah, just like real quick for anyone that hasn't seen it, a group of kids way back when had to fight an evil demon clown. And then they grow up having forgotten all of that. And one of them stays in the town, Mike. He calls them all. Their memories come flooding back. They have to come back and fight him as like middle-aged people.
Well, the memories start to come back when they get back to Derry and start to think about things that happened in Derry.
The more contact they have with each other, it's like it serves as triggers for opening these memory doors.
But I really think that this was
Mixed
more
metaphor.
Character-oriented. I think that this really played in multiple themes of childhood issues like safety, trauma adults place on kids, the importance of friendship, childhood fears that continue into adulthood and the ways that we avoid those issues, bullying, abusive parenting, racism.
Oh, these are all Stephen King classics.
And that is really prevalent.
Yeah.
So because we have these adults reflecting on these flashbacks as children, I think it adds a richness to this miniseries in a way that, like you said, the pacing is really reflective of this, but it really gives us the information as they are receiving the information. It hasn't all been laid out for us to then recollect.
As a result, there's a very even pacing throughout the whole thing where you don't have 20-minute stretches of like, oh God, enough. And also you're not bombarded by nonstop action set pieces to the point where you become tired. The other thing that the budgetary constraints did is it changed the nature of Pennywise a little bit, at least from the newer movie versions. Because they couldn't show big, flashy effects, Pennywise became much more of a psychological character, and he is relentless.
Yeah, he's very aggressive.
In the 1990s version, he is absolutely unceasing. He starts fucking with them as adults from the moment they get back into town and never lets up. Not even for a second. He's just nonstop. The only lulls he ever allows them is just enough time to catch their breath so he can snatch it away again. He's like a master of really twisted 3D chess fucking with you.
Yeah.
And he's sadistic in a way that is, to me, was more unsettling. Like Pennywise as Tim Curry, the Tim Curry Pennywise like definitely sits at home scribbling out like fucked up things to do to you.
Yeah, I mean, there is the demon that exists in Tim Curry's Pennywise that
He's gleeful.
Very invasive.
He's also...
And he gets a hold of them and doesn't let go. And he gets a hold of their, not just their superficial fears, but the depths of the fears that breaks them. Breaks them as people.
Tim Curry, although there are moments where he's very clearly like a monster or a demon, for the most part, he's a dude with makeup on. So there's this sense of Pennywise of being like a creep, like a lascivious, leering, disgusting kind of creepo that kidnaps kids that you don't get from the newer version, who's more like very clearly a demonic monster. Tim Curry kind of looks like John Wayne Gacy, it's like, ugh.
Well, it's interesting. The actress who played the young Beverly Marsh in the miniseries, Emily
Perkins, right?
She remembers Tim Curry on set saying that he would sit in his chair chain smoking in his makeup, and whenever the kid actors would get too close, he'd grin at them with these pointed teeth, and he tried to intimidate us because he wanted the fear to be in our performances. Oof. He didn't make any effort to be nice. And so that also, when we talk about Bill Skarsgård, who played Pennywise in the remake, it's very different approach.
Yes.
To the actors.
I agree.
That are playing along with them.
Yeah.
So I think that has a lot to do with it also because of, that was very reflective.
Tim Curry
the performances
is straight up terrifying in this movie. He really is. And
they're both very terrifying, but for different reasons and in different ways.
Tim Curry just, I don't know if it just hit me differently as an older man, older than I was. There's just an insidiousness to the psychological warfare that he wages on the Losers Club that is so unsettling.
Well, the way that this miniseries really does make the menace of Pennywise, like I said, it's sort of like an invasive bacteria that gets inside of you and can destroy you because it's based in your trauma, like the things that traumatize and really make you fear and break apart, as opposed to the remake where I feel like those are a little bit more superficial fears that he plays off of. Some of them are deeper, like especially with Bev, but I think for the most part,
it was more jump scares for sure. Yeah.
And, the budget and, the CGI of it.
Oh, we'll get into that.
But this one has a little bit of a more relatable.
Agreed.
You know how Stephen King writes things, even in the supernatural realm, that seem plausible? This one definitely seems plausible as opposed to the other version of Derry that we see.
Now, I'm gonna tell you, I'm from New York. I was born in the 80s. So a creepy guy with a Queen's accent telling garbage jokes and just generally being like a gross presence, it hits fucking home for me. I'm related to a few Pennywises, not in the murdering, eating children part, just in the other part. But so like there is that element of his performance that made me uncomfortable. Like I just, even without the clown makeup, like I still want to fucking be around you.
Well, there is a part in the miniseries where Mike tells Bill that there's some kind of force guiding us. I don't know if it came to help us or if we created it. And that really, I think, comes across really well in how deeply connected these characters are to each other.
Yeah,
that's one thing that the friendships, even though they may not have been talking throughout this 30-year time frame from when they were children until now they're adults living their own lives, when they get back together, there is a deep connection and love between them. So natural.
Oh, it's really lovely.
You know how when you say, oh, it's like we have seen each other yesterday and you come across that friend. This communicated that level of depth so well.
Yeah, there was a lovely maturity to the performances, of like Annette O'Toole and John Ritter was excellent as Ben Hanscom. This was his first horror movie. He had always wanted to do a horror movie, and it's interesting you mentioned George Romero. I didn't know George Romero was attached to it because he was also attached
to Cemetery
and to The Stand.
Yeah,
he was developing The Stand, and John Ritter was going to be in that version of it, and he was really disappointed because he had been a self-professed Stephen King fan since Carrie. Mm-hmm. He always wanted to be in a Stephen King movie, and he really wanted to do a horror movie because he was. He wanted to break out of his Three's Company typecasting. So after this, he went on to do Bride of Chucky, and he did Bad Santa, and then unfortunately left us way too soon. But it was just cool to see. At this point, I only knew John Ritter as like, oh, he's the nice guy from TV. And then he's in this very scary movie.
The ultimate defeat of Pennywise if you've read the novel, is the strength of their friendship.
Yeah.
And them coming together and always being accepting of each other and loving each other.
Yeah.
That was very clear with the kids and very clear when the adults regrouped. And I think that it was maybe something that wasn't as deep in
it
the
wasn't.
remake, because and we'll talk about that when we get there, but in the chapter 1-2 version, the kids have a falling out and they separate, and the adults fight against each other when they get back together. Like, there's not really a common grouping and a common, like, love between them. Not also, like it was here. This is what really, I think, transported this past just a regular horror movie. This was very deep, much like Stephen King's writing is about the complexities and depths of relationships, and then you dealing with the horrors around you.
I think largely a reason for that is in the 1990 version, you're spending equal time with both sides of the character, the childhood and adult versions, from the beginning. So by the time they reunite and they start the second half of their journey, you've already had some time with them on their own as adults. You know them a little bit. Also, God, the Stanley stuff in the original is... that part of the book is devastating, and in the original miniseries, it's done so well. It's so
heartbreaking, and also, the Munchausen by proxy that we witness with
Eddie, yeah,
and how like desperately he is like treated like such a sickly kid.
Oh yeah, you really, really feel for him.
You really do.
It's the 1990 version. Don't be put off, especially watching it now. It's it's been upscaled to HD and it looks fantastic.
Listen, it's very much a made-for-TV film,
but it is.
But it is
within that. It is like of the best. It is really good.
And they hit all the, like I said, they hit all the right notes to me.
I mean, they do. You mentioned the force behind which, if you've read the book, is Maturin, the cosmic world turtle.
Yeah. From also from the Dark Tower.
Oh yeah, he's like the secret behind the scenes protagonist of a bunch of Stephen King stories, from Insomnia to the Dark Tower to
See the turtle of enormous girth, upon his back he holds the earth.
Yeah, it's like the old Bertrand Russell anecdote of, it's turtles all the way down. Maturin features pretty heavily in the book, not so much in the movie versions.
No.
Because
I guess John Ritter asked about the turtle because
yeah,
he's a
big
fan,
Stephen King fan.
The people were like laughing at him.
Yeah, and in the Andy Muschietti versions, there are, if you're looking hard enough, there are a bunch of blink or you'll miss it Easter eggs of like turtle iconography. There's like a turtle sticker, a turtle Lego, but they don't have the giant cosmic world turtle because that's hard to do on screen without looking goofy.
Awesome. So I think maybe we want to talk about the next one after a quick break.
I think so too.
All right.
Getting away with literal murder takes skills, and baby, you've got them. But when it comes to crafting the perfect costume, well, let's just say your talents lie elsewhere. Maybe mommy never taught you to sew before you killed her and stole her face. Maybe you have knives for hands or husky meat paws, perfect for bashing campers, but not so great at threading a needle. But that doesn't mean you don't deserve to look cool. So come on down to Tears of a Clown Makeup and Costume Emporium and treat yourself to the obscene makeover your parents always suspected was hiding just beneath the surface. At Tears of a Clown Makeup and Costume Emporium, we look past your tired flesh suit to bring out the real you. Working together to determine your nightmare-inducing look, our team of sartorial sadists will assist you with all the fittings, measurements, and elective surgeries. So save your creativity for your ironic kill tableaus. From sloppy clown fits to demonic priest and everything in between, we guarantee a look to satisfy the monster within. If you're unhappy with your look, come come on back in and we'll straight up kill you. Be sure to ask about our Cenobite special. Get one half of your head riveted with nails, get the other half free. This is a fake ad for a fake product on a horror-themed podcast. Dressing up is cool, hurting people is not. Seriously, I shouldn't have to tell you this. Whatever it was, I hope you bought 2 of them.
So yeah, let's talk about It Chapter 1 and It Chapter 2. Came out in 2017, 2019. It takes place in 1988 and covers, I think...
Look, it's the same thing. It just, instead of the 60s and the 90s, it's the 80s and the 2020s. That's it. Or the 20-teens.
Pennywise only has 4 minutes of dialogue in this entire film.
In the first one? For real? Huh.
Yep.
Okay.
And Sophia Lillis, who plays Bev, said that she had to stand on a box in some scenes because she's only 5 feet tall and very short, but also wanted her adult version played by Jessica Chastain, which was realized.
Yeah, they did ask the kids who they wanted their adult versions to be, and Finn Wolfhard said Bill Hader, and Sophia Lillis said Jessica Chastain, and those both came true.
Will Poulter was originally going to be Pennywise under the Cary Joji Fukunaga, who directed the first season of True Detective and James Bond No Time to Die. But they had created differences with others, and they both left the project, bringing on...
That's another one of my alternate universe movies.
Yeah, bringing on Andy Muschietti.
Signore Muschietti.
Hugo Weaving was also considered as the role of Pennywise.
Probably best that he didn't do it. He's such a grump.
Well, Skarsgård ultimately got it, and he was rumored to not plan to return for the Chapter 2 because of how poorly the portrayal of Pennywise affected his mental health. He suffered serious nightmares.
Yeah.
Of various iterations of he as Pennywise killing children.
It's interesting watching Bill Skarsgård in basically anything else, because you're like, oh, you're like a normal person.
Yeah.
That's something I'm going to give the remakes. I think we've hinted pretty heavily that we had some issues with the newer versions, but damn, Bill Skarsgård fucking nails it as Pennywise.
Very scary. He wore teeth prosthetics that made him drool a
Yeah.
lot, and the director really liked this. So
yeah, he got that Bill mouth guard. Look. Bill Scar's mouth guard.
He did research into the Psycho universe, he called it, to find his own way of Pennywise, and he watched The Shining, Clockwork Orange, The Dark Knight, and Silence of the Lambs.
Yeah. See, you're mainlining a lot of crazy there, Bill, and you want to space that out, especially if you come from Sweden, where it is dark for so much of the year.
One major difference is that this film, I believe, had a budget of $50 million, grossed $123 million over its opening weekend, a record for horror films, and more than double that of the previous holder, Paranormal Activity 3.
Yeah, this was one of a few movies that came out within a few year period of like horror. Not just that, but like there were a few movies in a row that were rated R that made an absurd amount of money, and it caused Hollywood to really rethink. You know, the kind of prevailing wisdom was make it PG-13 and you'll make money. Now R-rated movies are making like $1 billion in box office, and that's why we're getting, an R-rated Deadpool movie out of Disney.
This is the highest grossing Stephen King adaptation to date. And it's one of the highest grossing R-rated films of all time with over 700 million.
Dogecoin? Yeah, so like straight up, Chapter 1 is really good.
It's really focused 100% on the kids.
It is only focused on the kids. You don't see the adult characters. Yeah, and I said it again. You
You're not introduced to them.
No.
The actors don't come in.
They weren't even cast at this point. And you don't feel that in the first movie because it doesn't exist. But holy shit, do you feel it in the second one?
It is world building. It is character building. It's really creating like a bond between the characters. However, there's a lot of blood and gore.
Which I'm fine with.
Yeah. And, there's a lot of darkness to the teenager bullies and the adults in the film. There is a very dark nature to these adult characters in the town of Derry.
Muschietti.
That isn't as focused on in the miniseries. So this stands out to me as how pervasive the being it, has on this town. Like, it's a really disgusting entity that lives in this town that makes everybody also hyper violent, mean.
Another point for the Muschietti versions is his depiction of Derry itself.
Yes.
Stephen King explores this a lot. In Pet Sematary, he literally says the earth is sour. So it's, what does the long-term presence of such malevolence do to the environment itself? He treats this demon like a pollutant. So the Muschietti versions do a much better job of showing the poisonous effects that this has had on the town. Henry Bowers is straight up fucking psychotic. Yeah. There's something deeply wrong with him. And it's very obvious from the get-go that he is possessing a rage that is not normal, even for a piece of shit bully. Yes, he literally is.
And I think that chapter 1 and chapter 2 do a much better version of how that manifests into his adult life as well.
Yes and no, because one thing that I noticed was very starkly missing from the newer versions was any sense of racism. Here's the reason that's a big deal. In one of the Losers Club, Mike Hanlon, he's black.
Yeah.
So in the book and in the original, obviously, bullies bullying the only black kid in town are probably going to be racist. And they are. Now, actually, in the original movie, the child actor who played Henry Bowers hated having to use the N-word and apologized
after every scene.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I read that too.
But those two actors were actually friends. They're way well past the movie into their adult lives. So
I would say it's more sexist. It's replaced by sexism
and homophobia. There's a lot more homophobia, but that really stood out as inauthentic to me. Of like, wait, hold on, this is a bunch of piece of shit bullies that have said every horrible thing about women and gays, but they're weirdly avoiding being racist again. Yeah. That was just, I thought, a deliberate choice that smacked a little bit of cowardice. I mean, you're showing this guy as a, again, woman-hating, homophobic, homicidal maniac, but racism is like too far for you? I didn't understand that.
I did think that chapter 1 did a very good job with Bev's trauma of being molested by her father. Jesus.
Without actually coming out and telling you. Yeah.
Because it portrayed it in such a way that I think anybody who has been, over-sexualized at a young age, especially when she cuts her hair, which is such a cathartic moment for the character.
Yeah. There's really that scene where her father says it makes you look like a boy, and you're like, yeah, dude, that's
exactly what I want.
That is why she did that.
I don't want to be a replacement for my mom.
Yeah.
I don't want to be your object of desire. I don't want to be anyone's
And then
object
again,
of desire.
in chapter 2, they take all subtlety out of that relationship with that perfume scene.
Yeah.
And you're just like, look, I already understood what was going on here. You really didn't need to ram that point home.
Yeah. That was that. And when we get into the chapter 2 part, that's sort of the problem I had is then it became almost an oversaturation of the children's stories. Are we separating the children's tale from the adult's tale? Or are we getting lazy with the adult's tale and trying to pepper in the more interesting aspect of these two parts, which is the children's tale.
So, okay, ladies and gents, here's the thing. These movies were originally released 2 years apart from each other, which was a bad idea. Now, there is also a massive tonal and pacing shift between chapters 1 and 2. Chapter 1 is largely scary with moments of levity because Richie's funny and Eddie's funny. But it's mostly scary.
And honestly, the kids
are wonderful. They're wonderful.
They're really wonderful. Also, though, I do want to say the fight between Bill and Richie really bothered me. Their separation over, because that didn't happen in the book. They were so connected by their trauma and that's how they defeated
it. Did seem like it was adding, it was sort of a lazy way to just be like, and now conflict.
But then that read very boldly to me in the second part where the inauthentic relationships between the adults really was distracting.
Well, here's what happens. So the first movie is like 2 hours and 40 minutes long, and it's all the kids. The second movie starts off with the adults, but it also features the kids. So you only get the adults for half of one movie. So it's 1/4 of the story is dedicated to the adults, and within the first 10 minutes, they've blown through the whole getting the band back together scene.
So
they
let's
move
jump
so
into
fucking
the
quickly
chapter
through
2
that.
then, starring Jessica Chastain, Bill Hader, James McAvoy,
James Ransone as Eddie. Again, really well cast.
I would say that the casting of the adult versions of the kids is perfect.
Even the
way
tiny
better
part of
than the miniseries.
even
the
Andy Bean.
Miniseries, they barely reflect their younger selves.
Oh yeah.
I mean, you can tell that they just put good actors in adult roles that they wanted to be in this film.
Yeah.
Not as a reflection of their younger
No
selves.
offense to John Ritter, but if you're supposed to be playing the former fat kid who got hot, but you're also a paunchy 40-year-old, it was, at least in the new version they cast some really cut New Zealander.
But in this chapter 2, the adults look like they were once those kids.
Even Andy Bean playing Stanley Uris, who has the smallest role, looks like a grown-up fucking version.
His face so much. They did that morph over it.
They also did
which was so well done.
The adult actors did a great job of mimicking their child counterparts.
But they didn't build relationships with each other.
And this is not the fault of the actors. This is strictly from a directorial and storytelling. It's a decision they made to. So not only is that a pacing issue in that the
chapter 1 was well paced.
Yes.
Chapter 2 was rushed.
So that's the thing is, now take aside what we just mentioned about you're only giving the adults 1/4 of the story. Even on its own, it was a poorly paced movie. The gathering together happens lightning fast, and then the movie goes on for another 2.5 hours. And it's really just exposition dump, action scene.
And they're barely
exposition
ever together.
They're barely together. They mostly do things apart from each other. Mike...
It's a lot of flashbacks.
In this version, Mike is painted like a straight-up fucking psychopath manipulator, and yet they're still friends with him. After he straight up gets a bunch of them killed.
The representation of Mike's character in this
awful.
Is terrible.
Really a disservice. They take away his agency as a child by making, in the original miniseries and the book, Mike was the one who had all the goods on the history of Derry. But in the new version, it's Ben. And then for some reason, Mike still stays around in the town. You're like, so the pacing really becomes an issue. And it becomes more of an issue because if what we're going to be doing here is waiting for these bombastic action horror scenes, because they aren't action horror, they're very loud, they're very big. So here's where the real problem comes in, and that is the CGI.
Well, that's one of the problems. Yes.
So the CGI in this film, now Andy Muschietti has demonstrated a problem with this in Mama, and holy shit did he demonstrate a problem with this in The Flash. Overuse of Babylon 5 style CGI.
Yeah.
And that's not a knock on Babylon 5. That show was from the 90s. This is a $50 million Warner Brothers movie from 2017.
Well, this is the approach. He took the source material into account, especially in the first chapter.
Mm-hmm.
But in the second chapter, he's like, well, I'm just going to make my own horror movie.
It really felt like those two movies were directed by two different people.
Well, a couple of the things, like he wanted, I don't know why, the choice to put these in the film when he could have focused on other aspects is he made Ben an alcoholic.
Yeah.
He had all of them search for tokens.
He made...
That was such a waste of, 45 minutes?
That's also, it's a really lazy screenwriting technique.
Because you
have
did it all in
MacGuffins.
flashback.
And it's
we just had 2 hours of children's story.
The entire first movie was a flashback.
Why do we need more token flashbacks? And there was no alluding to those tokens being stashed.
No, all of the sudden, there's this ritual of chud, and, Mike is lying to everybody and drugging people, which is like, what? And
Eddie's character
you're right,
being
there's not
stabbed
that
in the face and being able to just handle it.
Just
being able to handle it the way he did was really lazy.
There's not that sense, despite the fact that this is 2 movies totaling like 5 hours worth of movie time, their relationship is so unearned. Like they as adults, they get together and they're like, we love each other so much, but you don't really see any evidence of that, and you haven't spent enough time with them as adults.
I don't even think they say they love each other. I mean,
they do,
Bill goes
but
off and
you don't
tries
believe
to
it.
protect that kid.
What is up with that kid? Why is he so?
Human.
Why is he so obsessed with some weird rando kid that we've never even?
Human to us.
It's
make
just
them be like, oh wow, we really understand.
That was kind of like the third Michael Myers movie of the recent Halloween Ends, where they all of the sudden introduce a brand new character in the third movie and spend most of the movie with him, and you're like, what? Yeah. I don't know this or care about this person. I want to see what Laurie's up to.
Yeah.
It's the real, like the Paolo on Lost. Nikki and Paolo, the new characters, you're like, fuck these people.
Like, I just need to get through these episodes.
What's Jack up to?
I just skip those now.
Yeah.
Also, Stanley's letters. That was really lazy way
melodrama.
To make Stanley a character, and then they showed him writing the letters. And did they all get different letters? Why aren't we seeing the adults reading their letters?
How did he send those? When did he send those?
Mike leaves Derry
because in the book, in the original, between getting the phone call and killing himself, is minutes. He basically gets the phone call, kisses his wife, and kills himself.
Yeah. No, but now he sits down and writes each one of them their own letter.
So that's 2 hours, fucking weirdness. It's just...
I really hated that. I hated the ending.
This was a real Rise of Skywalker situation for me, meaning this... I really enjoyed it, Chapter 1, but it Chapter 2 was so bad that it made me not like the first one.
Well, I'm still gonna I really think the kid actors were incredible. They did a really great job. They showed all of the important things that we needed to see, which was their trauma and their coming together. But when they so easily fell apart, when things got tough, that is not true to the book and not true to the
They were much more selfish and self-serving.
And I guess maybe if you make it happen in the 90s... then maybe kids of that generation were a little bit more reflective.
I don't know.
I don't think so.
I don't think that's true. And I think it's very cynical to be like, well, everyone's just a dick now. Because I don't believe that. But there wasn't the same level of warmth between the adults that was so natural in the 90s version. Now, I'm going to say straight up, Jessica Chastain, James McAvoy, Bill Hader, they're better actors than Harry Anderson or fucking John Ritter. They're better.
Yeah.
But the performances of Harry Anderson and John Ritter were better because they were
underutilized,
more authentic. Yes, I really want to say I don't think it was the fault of the actors.
It wasn't.
They weren't given enough to chew on. Like, and the parts that they are in are just sort of like loud. And again, the CGI
and bullying Pennywise to death.
Okay. One more thing about the CGI. It really looked like bad outtakes from Who Framed Roger Rabbit. Like, when you're doing CGI, it should be supporting your vision in the background, enhancing what you've already created. Once you use it as the primary focus, it's all my eye looks at, and I can't help but notice how goddamn fake it looks. It just does. It's never going to look real, so you have to do it quickly, creatively, with shadows and light, so that it, like, you don't linger on it long enough to notice that it's fake as fuck. It's just so obviously they're wrestling with cartoon characters, and you're like, I mean, what? What's scary?
I will say that when they were watching the film projector, you know, the flashback in part 2, when they're watching the projector, and that is the stand-in for the photo album scene in the miniseries, which I really loved.
The photo album scene scared the shit out of me as a kid.
And the hugging, like, group hug with Bill Hader when they were washing off after they defeated Pennywise was very loving and sweet. Bill
Hader is so talented. Anybody wanting to see him flex his dramatic muscles in a better movie, check out Skeleton Twins with Kristen Wiig. He's magnificent in it.
Or Barry.
Barry's fantastic, but I feel like maybe not enough people have seen Skeleton Twins.
Yeah, that is a good one.
It's so good. And that was the first time I ever saw Bill Hader, where I was like, wow, you have real dramatic depth to you.
I think we're not saying so much that we hated chapter 2 and it was terrible. I think it did a disservice to the source material.
It was a letdown, especially since the first one was like really good.
The child actors were so elevated in my mind.
Really good.
They were given great character development, great content, great scenes, great opportunities to show their range.
And we've mentioned before, kid actors these days are on a whole new level than what they were like growing up.
And in the second chapter, the actors, it was like all of their scenes and everything were so fractured that made their relationships feel fractured and inauthentic. There were a lot of
scenes that were oddly out of character too. It's like, you didn't even really match this up with the first movie. They're acting differently. It's supposed to be the same summer, but it was a mess. It felt bloated and overstuffed, which is odd because you broke it up into 2.5 hour movies, so you should have had plenty of fucking time. I really felt like they were focusing on showing off their flashy toys instead of telling a tight story. Whereas I think the constraints of the budget and the censorship board, in the 1990 version, forced Tommy Lee Wallace to be like, okay, well, I've only got so much runway here. I can't waste anything. This was overindulgent. It was too much.
Well, it pivoted into breaking from the source material into a horror movie that this director wanted to make.
And it also tonally, it shifts much further into the comedic side in a way that it didn't in the first chapter. And you're just like, it becomes goofy.
The overall narratives are similar, but the plotting makes it very different. The remake, like we said, splits up the kid and adult stories, which is messy in the second chapter. Only focusing on the kid allows for a very different experience, and we don't get that same experience in chapter 2.
I think a lot of chapter 2's sins are in what it does or what it fails to do following chapter 1, of like, you really set us up for something wonderful here, and then you disappointed us.
Talk about Mike's character. Mike was so significant in the book.
Oh my God. He's the anchor. Yeah.
And he was so underutilized. And it was like, talk about a racist trope.
Yeah. It's like it's really hard to forget that this is the only black character in this story. Mm-hmm. And you have cut his time and his agency down from the source material, which, you would think if you're updating a 40-year-old story that you'd be more nuanced with it, having learned your lessons. But Stephen King, you can't improve on him.
Yeah.
He was more subtle and deep, 40 years ago. But I don't mean to really crap all over it. It's just, I think my frustration with It Chapter 2 is, again, Andy Muschietti knocked it out of the park with the first one. And the second one, when they were casting the adult roles, I was like, okay, this is going to be fantastic.
They didn't show a reflection of what childhood trauma looks like as an adult.
No, we didn't spend enough time. Also,
but they
Audra
did show really great childhood trauma, but not in part 2.
Audra, played by Olivia Hussey in the original, Bill's wife, is not a character in this movie. She is like, she plays his awful bitchy wife for like 30 seconds, and you just get the sense that it's an unhappy marriage because she sucks. Whereas Audra in the original movie literally ruins herself and gives up her mind to save her shitty husband who ran out on her and ends up like catatonic. She's, also Olivia Hussey.
Yeah.
So like that was weird. It's just, it's all flash and no substance. It was kind of a bummer. It's not scary at all, which is
it's just gross and
shitty,
a lot of CGI.
The first movie is legit very scary.
Because it preys on your innermost fears and
Bill Skarsgård
trauma.
Crushes it.
He does. He's so good, and he is legitimately fear-inducing, but he's not as psychological.
No, he because he's so otherworldly in his look, in his movements, in the way Pennywise is portrayed. From the very beginning, he's supernatural. So you can have that distance, I think. It's like when I'm watching horror movies, the more fantastical the premise, the more I can separate myself. Even if it's a really scary or gory movie, I can still be like, I'm probably not going to step outside and get hit by a fucking werewolf. The Tim Curry version, though, there's just a familiarity with the character because he looks like a human man that makes it so, it makes it grimy and insidious.
I mean, since fear and being scared is like a personal, subjective experience.
For sure.
I think that the miniseries seemed to land more of those subjective scares for each of the individual, and this was more like a generic.
It was. Trope. It did feel more generic. Now, again, some of the things that we think Andy Muschietti did wonderfully, really characterizing Derry as being like poisoned, and its inhabitants as being, off their fucking rockers. The strange, unexplained hostility and violence of the town. The strength of the casting. Eddie Ranson, I haven't really mentioned him, but his adult James Ranson, playing an adult Eddie Kasparek, is so good. He really spot on mimics his child counterpart.
Yeah. Plays
a great version of Eddie, except for the fact that for some goddamn reason, in the new ones, they chose to not have him use his inhaler as a battery acid spitting clown killer, which is in the book and the original miniseries, and was like my favorite part when he's because like, "This is battery acid."
What you believe?
Yes. So let's touch on that. In all versions, you basically kill Pennywise through the like magic of friendship, love, and imagination. However, that is done better in the 90s version than it is in the new version, which is, it's really hard to not be goofy when it's a bunch of adults standing around screaming like, "You're just a clown," over and over and over again for like what seems like 10 minutes.
Well, Tim Curry's Pennywise is more menacing. He is cruel.
He is cruel.
He taunts them and tortures them. He's more aggressive, and he gets to the core of their trauma and fear in a way that Skarsgård's Pennywise does not.
No, Skarsgård's Pennywise unfortunately has like one move where he makes a bunch of faces at you, and then he shakes back and forth really fast, screams, and runs at you. And he does that like 9 times, and it loses its effect. The first time, it's fucking terrifying. But then you're like, is this the part where you shake your head, scream, and run at me?
Also, what you mentioned was the pacing. When we watch the miniseries, because of how it's laid out, we have a lot of time with each individual adult as they reflect on their child trauma and their reaction and reflection with each other.
You see them in their like own lives.
They don't take that time.
No.
With the adults in chapter 2.
But like I said, but in the first 10 minutes of the movie, they're already at the Chinese restaurant having their reunion meal.
Yeah.
You're like, whoa, that's that's lightning fast.
And like what turmoil the adults don't seem to be in psychological turmoil. Jessica Chastain just leaves her abusive husband and has no trauma.
She never mentions it. Whereas Annette O'Toole, same situation, out loud says, how could I have done this? How could I have been so stupid? And she acknowledges that she had forgotten everything, even the fact that her father abused her.
When they cry, the others come and hug them in the miniseries. They share the trauma. They really do believe that together they can overcome things. So it's very, very
The difference
prevalent.
I see in these is that it felt to me like Tommy Lee Wallace read the book cover to cover and then read it again with, a pen and took notes. Whereas Andy Muschietti like speed read parts of the book and went, oh, these are the coolest, flashiest parts. I'm going to spend all my money on those. The thing is, despite how quickly they pace the beginning of chapter 2 to like get everyone together, that movie drags like a motherfucker because it's like being on a roller coaster for 2 hours. Roller coasters are largely effective because they're bursts of adrenaline that are over in like 15 seconds. If you do that all day, you're just exhausted. And like ragged.
Yeah.
Which is how I felt after this movie. I'm like, I feel tired.
I mean, the ending of this chapter 2 was not satisfying.
At all.
As
not in the way the original was.
No, an ending to the miniseries, I think, left enough ambiguity in whether they're going to be okay or not.
I mean, Bill is not okay at the end of the original.
Right.
But at the end of this one, he's writing his new book and everything's fine. He's in his big old house. Yeah. At the end of the original, he's carrying his poor, like, brain-scooped wife away. It's terrible.
But they also only show Bill and Mike.
Yeah. You don't really catch up with Richie. You just see
Mike
him.
Leaves Derry, which that doesn't happen in the book.
They also, and I did actually kind of like addressing Richie's homosexuality, which is lightly hinted at in the book, not addressed at all in the 90s miniseries. I think it's overdone because while I buy his homosexuality, having him suddenly be in love with Eddie his whole life was like, wait, where did that come from?
Not show it, no longing glances.
Unearned. It was unearned.
I would say, if anything, the book leaves an ambiguity around Richie's character as being maybe bisexual, because
which is why
he very much loves Bev. Everybody loves Bev.
I think that is the experience of a lot of gay men in the 80s and of not living authentically. Or kind of living not even knowing yourself because you have had to lie to yourself for so long that you're not sure yourself what's true and what isn't. It was nice to see an actor of Bill Hader's caliber express this side of Richie's character, but having him fall in love with Eddie was like, well, why? Because he was there? It is never explained. It's not earned. In It Chapter 1, there is zero hint of that. There's not even a hint of it.
There could have been just like two subtle moments.
Nothing.
I know.
It just came out of
nowhere. And
nowhere.
we're talking the 90s here, now 2017, which it could have even been a little bit more overt. If they wanted to have him carve his initial loving Eddie at the end, like if that was a choice, then you could have made other small choices. Like you could have taken out the whole Bill trying to save that local kid's life, which he failed at.
And also zero stakes. I didn't care because I don't know this kid.
And it just was also like the stuttering.
It was better. We didn't have enough time with the adults
they read as
that's
very
it.
Thin.
Yeah.
No character
They weren't there
development
long
as adults.
enough, and the focus was more on the spectacle and less on the characterization. The real strength of it has always been the Losers Club, the bond, the characters. Listen, reading the book, it's wild. There's a fucking cosmic world turtle in it. It's a crazy, crazy book.
Well, when
the lasting strength of that, aside from Pennywise being the scariest thing imaginable, is you fall deeply in love with every single one of these characters, both as children and adults. I cried so hard when Stan died in the book. Like, I was a wreck.
Yeah.
And that did not happen in the new version of the movies. You're like, yeah, okay, he's gone.
Some of the things, well, the ending specifically, nobody's ever done the orgy scene between Bev and the rest of the losers.
They have not.
Annette O'Toole said that she really wanted to have that scene because it really showed how intertwined they all were.
That's Superman's mom you're talking about.
But let's talk about the ending. So when
she is breathy in this, like
she is,
I really,
she's so loving.
She's wonderful, but I really want to point out Annette O'Toole's delivery. It's like the ultimate sexy 90s. Like, she's very breathy.
She's so, like, she is the thread of love, the hope.
Yeah,
for all of
she's
that.
the heart and soul of these,
is.
6 gross teenage boys.
She's very affectionate with them all.
Yeah, it's Stephen King wrote it in a way that was, I think it's very complicated to get right. And Annette O'Toole displayed an affection and a warmth where you get the sense that they all loved her and she loved all of them. More than friends, but less than lovers. There was sort of like a middle ground where they were more than just friends to her, but she was only really in love with one of them. She thought it was Bill, but it was really Ben.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's, I don't know how you'd translate that onto the screen, or even if you should, but it is something from the original book that does stand out.
Well, when it is defeated in the novel, the entire town of Derry is destroyed because it basically implies that it is the town. It doesn't live in the town. It is the town.
Oh, yeah. It's been there for millions of years.
And in the book, Mike's pretty severely wounded after Henry Bowers comes into contact with him, and he doesn't even join them in the sewers for the final battle with Pennywise.
Yeah.
Stanley, we said, doesn't write the suicide note, and they all forget their memories after parting ways at the end of the book.
Yes.
That's the whole point of the power of this town and this entity. And it was also Stephen King's reflection on friendship, is that you can spend a true friendship, you can spend time apart and come back together, and all of your memories come back, and it's like you never left. In the miniseries, there is a wrap up of what happens next. Mm-hmm. And I think the narrator, who is essentially Mike, is saying that they did forget some of what they went through. Not all. Yeah, I think it's like some of it. Like they didn't lose their memories the first way. For each other, right? Yeah, but their memories got softer. They retained all their memories. Yeah, they're fine. Why? That's dumb. Yeah. I'm sorry, but that was a dumb choice.
Well,
and also, none of them need therapy after.
That's
Mike's
the thing.
like, I just packed up my crazy lunatic attic, and now I'm going to head down to Florida like I always wanted.
That's the thing is if the movie is about showing us what childhood trauma did to these adults, and then at the end of it, these adults go through a second massive trauma where another one of their friends is killed in front of them.
But we don't
and they're
even
fine.
see that adult or that childhood trauma manifesting with these adults.
No,
in
you're
chapter
like
2. They're like just living kind of whatever lives.
But you're also given like a one like Ben's lonely, Richie never married, Eddie's still a hypochondriac, and it's like all right, okay.
He's a risk manager.
Yeah, it just
was
didn't work for me, folks.
Not authentic, but the childhood trauma of
Mi
the
dispiace,
adults
signori Muschetti.
in the miniseries is so well executed.
Absolutely.
Because they're not living good lives. They're not happy, and they're struggling with things. Ben's character is clearly an alcoholic, and you do know it right from the start.
Yeah.
And a womanizer and not happy. And then when they hear Mike calling them, it brings back the trauma from Derry.
It was much better done in the original, that moment on the phone.
Yeah.
Because in the movie version, they're like clutching their heads or barfing and doing like very, very big, obvious signs that, this is happening. Yeah. Oh,
and
I've got this scar on my
goes
hand.
away. Do you remember that?
No,
from the
I don't
book?
know. It's been a long time. But in the 1990s version, that reaction was a little slower and more subtle, and you could really read the conflict on the actor's face of I'm simultaneously remembering my happiest, most loving moments and my most traumatic, scariest moments all at once.
And Richie basically tries to outrun this responsibility.
Oh, yeah. Harry Anderson is like, I don't want any fucking part of this.
Yeah.
But he still does.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's great. I think my favorite part of it, chapter 2, if there is any, would be Bill Hader and Eddie Ranson, James Ranson's portrayal.
Can you tell me why they got their tokens and what they did with them?
Because
in chapter 2,
when you are a screenwriter and you're aiming for 120 pages and you've got 60 left to go, you go, well, what if I send them all off on 20-minute long bullshit quests
to
get a thing?
Is what you're
it's
telling
called
me.
a MacGuffin. Alfred Hitchcock came up with the term. Steven Spielberg uses it a lot. It's basically when you just make an item that you send your person out to go find, and then they find that thing and they bring that thing back, and that's the thing they need to beat the bad thing.
But they didn't even bring their things.
I know. What was Ben's journey? Ben's journey to get his token was to go to the school, but his token was a fucking letter he'd already had in his wallet for 30 years. He didn't need to go anywhere.
No, he went to the school so that he could have that memory. Of
All he had to do was take his wallet out, though. Like, what was your journey? This was literally just the screenwriter being like, fuck, I gotta fill out 20 more pages.
And she goes into this home that later she sees doesn't exist.
Which, that was in the first one. She did that when she came out of the apartment. And it was like all run down and fucked up.
But she didn't go in the baseboard and grab a intact Ziploc bag of memories.
No, she wasn't out to find the crystal skull or whatever, the Holy Grail.
Like, I understand that was more like an created trauma issue that was happening to her, and then as she stepped back she saw that it was really in her head, but this was actually she had a tangible thing from that imagined re-traumatization.
It did feel, and I never appreciate this feeling when I'm watching a movie, when it feels like the director pauses their own movie to grab you by the lapels and just be like, do you understand what's going on, you stupid piggies?
Yeah, they did make a lot of overt in-your-face
things.
It's
why I'm not a huge fan of that Office-style mockumentary thing, because...
Well, didn't I say something in the middle of when we were watching it? And I said,
yeah, you were like, it's like The Office. Basically, like, when they turn to the camera and explain the scene you just watched, and you're like, yeah, I know, dude, I just watched that. You didn't have to recap it for me as soon as it ended. They did that a lot in this movie, and I'm like, yeah, thanks for telling me. I just watched all that happen.
Listen, everyone, here's our ultimate recommendation.
I want you to know, we came
Remake.
into this with much more positive intentions, and both of us, I think, were surprised by how this ended up.
Honestly, I hadn't watched the miniseries probably since the initial watch when I was like a teen.
Oh yeah, maybe I think I watched this in like 1996 or 97, and that was probably it. Yeah.
And I have not reread it as an adult.
Mm-hmm.
So
it's a big one.
Here are my recommendations to the listener. Read the book It.
Mm-hmm.
Watch the miniseries.
Yes.
And then watch chapter 1 and chapter 2 and see which one you prefer.
Here's my recommendation. Read the book, watch the miniseries, watch it chapter 1. Pretend it stops there. Don't watch chapter 2. Chapter 2 is one of those experiences, like I said, like Rise of Skywalker, where it rubbed me so poorly in the wrong way that it actually tarnished the experience of the first movie, where I can't view it separately anymore. And I'm like, okay, now it's just like the good half of a disappointing movie.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't expecting this at all.
No, we don't like to yuck yums on this pod, and sorry, Andy.
But I got a lot of problems with you people.
We hope that you know, he's going to be doing The Brave and the Bold.
He made the first one, and it was amazing. But
he's done this before.
These together. I'm collecting
He's done this
these
before.
Together.
Andy Muschietti directed the brilliant short film Mama, which scared the pants off of me. Then he turned it into a feature film, which was a slog. Because as a short film, it was fantastic. As a 90-minute movie, it was largely padding.
I mean, I felt like chapter 2 had a lot of... It really represented the Stephen King of it all in the way that... I
mean, he was legit
Shawshank
in it,
Redemption,
too.
Well, he was in chapter 2.
Yeah.
Shawshank Redemption. It had Stand By Me vibes. So chapter 1 was extremely successful, in my opinion. But I'm taking these two together.
Well,
because it's meant to be
chapter 1 and chapter 2.
It
yeah.
represents the whole, which is the novel, is the source material. And so the miniseries up against chapter 1 and 2, my preference is the miniseries, but you know how I feel. Always go to the source. And read the source so that you can make the best decision for your own interests.
Ultimately, an absolutely devastating creative decision to change the pacing of the movie between chapter 1 and 2. It's what ground it to a fucking halt and beefed the characterization of them as adults, despite nailing the casting. Some of the fucking most spot-on casting I've ever seen.
Maybe they should make an audiobook with all the adult characters from chapter 2.
Or just, move on. Yeah. See what other Stephen King books you can fuck up.
I just want people to read it, and it's a big undertaking.
It's worth it.
It took Stephen King 4 years to write,
which in regular writer years is 4 centuries.
I think that people can take 4 weeks to read.
Normally, Stephen King writes 4 books a year.
Do you think 4 weeks to read this is too ambitious that I just put out there?
That's, I would never put a timetable on someone's reading because everyone reads at their own pace, and everyone is also got different shit going on.
Yeah, but if you read 50 pages a day, you could totally read it in a month.
Don't rush it. Take your time.
Rush it, but
it really is a masterpiece.
You should really read it. As I should read The Stand, but I will someday.
You should. It's so good.
Anyway, this was our Remake It
from 1990. 2017 and 2019. That is 2 whole different generations of people.
It is. So,
Yeah. Watch 9 hours of clown content after spending several months reading a book about it. You will be clowned up the old clown hole.
Oh, can you cut that? That's
nope.
So bad.
That is staying exactly where I clowned it.
Bye, everyone.
Terror in Tandem is written, produced, and recorded by Laura and Richard Mathiasen, and edited and mixed by Richard Mathiasen. Our theme was written and performed by Carrie Denver, and all other music was written and performed by David Sispanik. All opinions expressed on this podcast are our own and should be taken as such. Thanks for listening, and please remember to give us a like, a review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. See you next time. We're standing right behind you.